You're listening to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm your host, Amy Stone. Here, I share stories from real people navigating the adventure that I call adulting. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Hello, friends. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to Valerie Friedlander. We talk about a time where she made a shift in the music she was listening to and how this impacted her life. So listen, this is such an interesting conversation, you guys. Valerie shares about the role and importance that music has for her overall and what was going on in her life at this time leading up to this. Plus, we talk about the ripple effect that this one small decision and choice has made in her life. We do also have like a whole sidetrack conversation about whether or how super helpful close inspection of past decisions might be or can be. And I think Valerie has a super helpful perspective on this, in my opinion. So I think you're going to love this. Let's do it. Valerie Friedlander, welcome to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm happy you're here. Are you ready for a fun chat?
Thank you. I am so ready. I love a fun chat.
Yay! All right. My first question for all of my guests is always, what part of the world do you call home?
I call currently Chicago home, Chicago, Illinois, which is on the
Yay!
ancestral lands of the indigenous tribes of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations.
Very cool. Very cool. So, and all right, those are new tribal words for me.
There were a
Uh,
lot of tribes that lived on, well, that there were ones that called it home, but like lots of trading here because obviously the Great Lakes. So,
oh
and
yeah.
we have a lot of active communities of indigenous people here that are bringing, a lot of awareness to their cultures and the space that we live on, the land that we live on. So it's a great place. I love Chicago so much.
Chicago is a great place. So I'm in Miami, which is interesting because it's a coastal town. It's
Hmm.
got water, but when it goes back to doing the ancestral statement, Miami was a transitional place, even apparently then. So it's like people
Hmm.
would come through and leave, and so we call out the tribes that have left memories of it, but the history is really they think that people move through here a lot. So it's like Tequesta, and we also have Seminole and Miccosukee who are still here in Florida. So
Mm.
Tequesta, Calusa, Miccosukee, and Seminole are the people that we call out when we do that. But it's fun to
Hmm.
look it up. A couple of years ago, not too long ago, they were building Miami big real estate place. They were going to build another new giant luxury condo, and they went dig dig and found like a historic site. And so now we have a park instead of a brand new luxury condo building in that location, which
I'll
people
take
probably
that.
have a variety of opinions about.
Probably.
All right, next warm-up question. What is one way that you like to recognize or honor something celebratory?
Mm. So, I mean, I'm a foodie.
Okay.
So when there's something to celebrate, I like to celebrate with food.
I love it. I love it. That's a great
That's a
answer.
big one. I always love going to interesting places, and of course, Chicago. We've got lots of really yummy places, and I also dabble in like cake making.
Okay.
Type of, like I wouldn't say like I'm an expert by any means, but I like to get creative with cake. So like I made Elsa's castle once. I
Oh,
made
wow.
the Lonely Mountain, which was a lot of cake for for my kid. Not
Wow.
to say like I mean it's if you went to like an expert cake maker, it would probably look a little bit better, but it was yummy and I enjoyed it. So celebrating if I have time to make something, I will make it. But otherwise, absolutely going to someplace. Food
That's,
is
I
my
mean,
love language.
a homemade cake, the effort that goes into that, that's a tremendous designation of importance and value. And the people in your life are lucky to have that for sure. For sure. All right. Topic of the day, neither tribal lands nor cake. I actually love the topic that you chose for this conversation.
Mm.
I will say that when I started the show at the beginning of the year, and all I had was a concept. One of my hopes was that people would bring both stories of big, sort of acute crisis
Hmm.
level changes, and also some of the smaller decisions that can have either big or little impacts on our lives. And what you shared is that you made an intentional shift in the music you were listening to at one point in your life,
Hmm.
and how this affected how you wanted to show up in the world. How long ago was this, if you remember?
This would have been probably 2003.
All right, so a long time,
A long
22,
time ago. I don't
two
want to talk about how
decades.
long ago that was. It was my senior year of college, so
All
like
right,
date
very
myself.
good. All right, so I think you said that you were listening to Amy Mann is
Yeah.
the artist that you were listening to. How long had you been a fan of Amy Mann and the style of music?
Interestingly enough, I hadn't listened to Amy Mann like a lot. I had a roommate my freshman year who really loved the Magnolia soundtrack, and I think she was the one who introduced me to the music. And it didn't really hit, I don't think, until like I started really listening to it kind of on repeat, probably sophomore, junior year of
Okay.
college. So not
In
super long.
in that season, like that season in that early 2000s, how were we listening to music at that point? Were you listening? Was this like iPod,
CDs. It was
CDs?
CD. I mean, so that was the beginning of, or actually the beginning and end of Napster.
Okay.
And being on a college campus, you weren't supposed like we had an open network, and you weren't supposed to take music off of people's computers
Right.
because,
Okay.
there are rules about that, but we all were doing that. Like, oh, you could go into their shared folders and people had their music shared on folders and you could go grab music. So it was MP3s and CDs. Hmm.
Very, very. So that is, I do remember that time.
Yeah.
When you're talking to a broke group of students and you're saying, "Hey, listen, don't you should go buy it again instead of taking the free copy that's right over there." It's not the most successful place to make that pitch because you're not talking to people with deep pockets.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I support artists and I want all of the artists to do really well, and also I'm going to take my friend's free music.
Yeah. 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 I have a lot of musician friends. My son is interested in becoming a musician along with acting and all of that. And so like, and I'm also an artist. So,
Yep.
and yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. At that
Well,
time, mhm.
all of those things about it's really interesting how all of the file sharing and art sharing things have really dramatically changed from like
Yeah.
the 1990s. And it's absolutely a conflict of like intention and rules and what technology allows us to do, right? So
Hmm.
in the old days, right, if you wanted to copy a song, you had to be there with your little like cassette player and hit
Oh,
record
I
from the
have those
radio.
too, just to
Right,
be
right,
clear.
right.
I absolutely have
Right, or
those.
bootleg it at the
Hmm.
concert or whatever. And now it's not that way. Somebody takes you can take a picture of things and share it right away. It's just a very different world than it used to be. And
Oh yeah.
ignoring the intersection of technology and how we actually use it is not a fun conversation. Is I guess what
No.
I'll say. Like, so I guess that's what I'll say. All right, very good. So, how big a part of your life at this point when you were in college was listening to music?
Oh, well, so listening to music overall has always been a huge part of my life. Music kind of runs in my veins. My grandmother, my mom's mom was a music critic. Like she was a journalist and
Ooh,
wrote music. That was part of how she met her husband, my grandfather, whose parents were both composers. And my mother played in the symphony. She played French horn in the symphony. So like music has always been really key. I took voice lessons for a long time. I was in a children's choir. Like music is if I have feelings, listening to music is part of how I process the feelings, right? That's part of like, and I actually made a mix a while ago with a CD back when we did that.
yeah.
That because I recognized that while I wanted to get out of a funk, I called the CD Out of a Funk because just listening to upbeat music when you're in a funk is not helpful. But I also didn't want to listen to only music that was like resonant with the vibe that I was in. So I made a CD that was progressive. So it started with the mood that I was
Yeah.
feeling, and then slowly shifted into more optimistic, more health. So like it was went from like I feel awful, everything is terrible, life is dark to I'm healing. I'm starting to see, how long is this going to take? This kind of mix of like I want to feel better into then the like I'm doing this work. I'm starting to see the light into like upbeat, like um I'm trying to think like Jimmy Eat World,
Yeah.
like the
All right.
those sorts of so I made this mix to help me move through the feelings that I was having. So music has always been really critical in my emotional experience.
So yeah, so today we would do playlists for people,
Yes,
right? We
I
do
actually turned
playlists.
it into a playlist because I was like, I
Good.
still need this in my life.
So fun story. So we have all these kids in my family, and so we tend to have. Right now we don't have it, but we sometimes have like a lot of legacy tech. So like for forever we had a VHS player because we had old kid things that were only on VHS. So anyway, we had the dual cassette deck in a couple different places for a very long time, and about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, one of my kids made a mixtape, so like a cassette for a girlfriend. Like so, it was like an adolescent romance. So they gave this to the person as a present in school, which was a very very thoughtful gift. Anyway, the parents pulled me aside like later that weekend, and they're like, we had to go buy a cassette player so that this person could actually listen to it. Like this was there was a lot of effort required, but they were super impressed. They were like the effort that it went. They were like, oh my God, a mixtape. What is it? It was really funny. But they were like, we didn't have a cassette player, and thanks for that. I was like, I didn't know. I
I
wasn't
bought
involved in this
my younger
process.
son. I bought my younger son a disc player. I want to say Discman, but a disc player because we have so many CDs and we
Yeah,
had like, and he wanted to have headphones, and I was like, I'm not buying you a smartphone and like all this stuff. So I was like, we have CDs. You could listen to whatever you wanted if you had a player that you could put headphones on and listen to it. So yeah,
you
I
did.
mean,
Yeah,
but it
no,
was hard
very
to
good.
find.
They're hard to find, but it's a good thing. I don't think we have any CDs anymore, any music CDs. It was mostly the movies that kept it around, but we then had the audio. But now we went through a phase where we got a new record player, like a new Bluetooth record player, and that was short lived. Because there's so it's like there's the joke, right, that we keep having to repurchase our own music in different formats. It's like I used to have these albums and now I have to rebuy them, but they're three times as expensive because like it's like but anyway, always in
Well,
support of
I'm
the
about to go to a place to try and fix the record player that we have or see if it makes more sense to get a new one because I inherited my grandmother's record
ah
player along with a whole set of records, which I have gone through and gotten rid of some things, but I have my grandmother's classical music records, and then my parents moved, and so I pulled out a whole bunch of my dad's, and I was like, I have this record player. I pulled out a whole bunch of my dad's classical
yeah.
classic rock records. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I love this. We should have, I mean, I have a record player.
Yeah, no, 100%. It is really interesting to like re-buy it. So like yeah, no, it's super fun, but it's moves that like would cause me to like get rid of the old archival things. And then,
Yeah.
I was rough on CDs going back and forth into like I would scratch them and then toss them. And now I just feel like I repurchase things in my like iTunes, Spotify playlist every so often. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I've owned this in a variety of places already, but I guess I'm buying it again today.
Yeah. Well, we still have all the CDs too. We have a whole case. My husband has been going through these different CD projects. First, we were putting them in cute books to put on bookshelves. And we're like,
Yeah.
this is taking too much room. So now we have a case. And I'm like, should we really have all of this? My husband was also a DJ in
Oh, so he's
college.
never letting
So
it
like
go.
he has all
Yeah.
of these CDs from when he was a hip hop radio DJ.
DJ.
So like I'm excited because we had to get a new car, but it has a CD player in it.
Oh, it
It's a
does.
2000 it's a 2023 and it has a CD player. Somebody must have asked for it or whatever, but I am
I guess.
thrilled.
I do not think. At one point, I do remember at one point I had a disc changer that very
Oh yeah.
inconveniently lived in the trunk of the car.
Yes. Yeah, we had one of those. We had one of those.
Like you want to go back and talk to the engineers and be like, "Hey, What was the thinking here? All right. So, anyway, memory lane, that was a diversion. Very good. What else was going on? You were in college. What else was going on in your life that had you thinking about maybe how you wanted to show up in your life? Like, how did this sort of grow? What was going on?
Okay. So I grew up with the dynamics of alcoholism in my family. And my my dad shares about this very he's done a stage presentation. So I have approval to share, just to be clear, because I really take the idea of anonymity that is important. But he got into recovery when I was 8.
Okay.
And so I thought well, first of all, I didn't even understand. They told me, "Oh, your dad's going to AA, your mom's going to Al-Anon, and you're going to go to Alakid." And I was like, "What does that mean? I don't even understand." Because it wasn't like overt. It was more just a way of just shutting out. And so I thought, well, I watched my parents do all of this work. So I have all the tools. I am good. I am predisposed to codependency, my mom told me at one point, but because I know it, I cannot do it. Of
Okay.
course, that just knowing something cognitively is not the same thing as having it in an embodied experience of how to act. So I felt like the way I describe it often is that I was given this toolbox, but I was only taught how to use a hammer.
Okay.
So I used the screwdriver like a hammer and I used the wrench like a hammer, right? So I knew all of these things enough to weaponize them against myself and tell
Yeah.
myself I knew all the things, so I should know better. Why, oh, I shouldn't beat myself up. And so I beat myself up for beating myself up, those sorts of patterning. So mostly it was used against myself. So I got into college and got into a really dysfunctional relationship, as many of us are wont to do in college, learning things. But it I basically found somebody who had a hole they were digging in their life, and I went, I can help you. Let me in, and jumped right in and started digging alongside. Like, I'm just gonna
Okay.
dealing with my stuff. I don't need to because I have all these tools. So I will help you. Let's dig. And it was it it was not a great time. A lot of people after I got out of that relationship commented on how much happier I seemed, like how much better. And that went like freshman to sophomore year, kind of on and off sort of
Okay.
dynamic. Just it was emotionally abusive, really, was what it was. And I have done a lot of work kind of unpacking how did I participate in that dynamic for myself so that I cannot repeat patterns. But because of that, what stood out to me in that was in junior year, I had a roommate. And at one point, I accused her of being like my ex. And that flagged for me that, wait a second, who is the common denominator here? Right?
Yep.
Shame on you. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Whatever. I'm the common denominator. I'm doing something that I'm repeating something. And I have done everything I can think of to fix it. I have used every tool like a hammer and I don't know what to do. So I climbed into my bed and I went, I'm just going to stay here and not get up. I just kind of really I always had a tendency toward depression and so I just was really depressed and was going to stay in bed forever. And I was blessed to have a friend who was really more my roommate's friend at the time who came in looking for her, found me, and checked in and was like, hey, you mentioned in one of our late night chats that your dad is an alcoholic. I'm going to an Al Anon meeting. Would you like to come with me? And I went, well, it can't get worse than this, so why not?
All
I,
right.
I thought I already knew all of the things by osmosis from my parents, but apparently something. And I went to a meeting and I went, oh my gosh. Oh, yeah, I definitely belong here. I am doing all of these things. So about a year later, so this was about so that was junior year. It was like towards the beginning of or no, the end of senior year was when that moment happened that I described to you where I was driving. So I had been working the Al-Anon program, I had been going to a therapist. I had had a slightly healthier relationship, though still fairly emotionally enmeshed with someone who lived in London. So,
Okay.
so there was some distance there. But I had been working on this stuff and I was listening to this album that I had been listening to because it really just really resonated with how I was feeling. So some of the songs on there, one of the first songs is Momentum, and this is the Magnolia soundtrack. Momentum, which goes, "Oh, for the sake of momentum, I've allowed my fears to get larger than life, and it's brought me to my current agendum. Uh, I know life is getting shorter. I can't bring myself to change the scene even when it's approaching torture. I've got my routine."
Okay.
And another song that stands out is called Save Me, which is Save Me from the ranks of the freaks that suspect they could never love anyone. And there's so many songs like that have that vibe to them of this. And the movie itself is about very dysfunctional people. And I was like listening to this and it suddenly struck me, I don't want to vibe with this music anymore. I'm singing it. I'm like feeling the feels. And I'm like, wait, I don't want to be this much of a victim of my life. I don't want to just let things happen to me and feel like I'm just, momentum is carrying me forward and I'm not choosing and I need to be saved by somebody because I can't choose to do something different. Like, I don't want that. I can make choices. And I'm like, and I had this whole conversation with myself in the car about making choices and how, it's I'm afraid of making the wrong choice, but really there is no wrong choice. And I can make choices that then if I don't like it, I could change my mind. And maybe I can't go backwards. Maybe I can. Like maybe I can like go back and go, oops, I don't want to do that. Or maybe I just make a different choice as I go along. And it was like, I think my drive was maybe 45 minutes, an hour long. And like that was the conversation I was having with myself on this drive, listening to this music.
And so I have a question about the conversation, which is like a random question that popped into my head while I was writing this out. When you talk about having a conversation with yourself, the answer to this makes no difference to anything ever, but I just was like super curious. Was this like silently in your head, like thoughts, or are you a person who like
No,
talks
I
out loud?
probably was talking it out loud. I was
Talking.
probably talking out loud to myself. I am absolutely, throughout my life, my mom says she would always know what was in my head because I would be singing about it.
Okay.
So when I was a little kid, mostly, but I mean, I still do like when I'll sing through something that I wasn't singing through that conversation. That was probably an out loud conversation.
Right. Alone with your car, but talking to
Alone with my car, but talking
okay.
to myself. Absolutely. I would consider myself an out loud processor. It helps
Yes.
me to hear myself. And so that was actually how I started a podcast. Interestingly enough, I was in a chosen mastermind with three other women and we would vox each other. And they were like, you should start a podcast. I love hearing you talk through, like essentially coach yourself
Yeah.
on Voxer.
When is the first time you had somebody tell you that out loud processing was a thing? Because I can remember the first time somebody was like, hey, because it's a thing. People will make jokes about
Yeah.
talking to yourself out loud, like, and all those things. But out loud processing is a way that people do things. So do you remember the first time somebody told
I
you they're like,
actually
you don't?
don't. I don't. I do remember my mom telling me that I needed to watch out because I have diarrhea of the mouth.
Fair enough.
Um, and that goes back to a conversation we were having before we started recording, which is that idea of being an open book, because I would share things with people that really I didn't need to be sharing with, not just the topic, but with the person. Like I didn't have a filter in terms of this is a safe person to share this with. I would just share everything. And it took some learning of no, there are some people you share, some people you process with, and some people you don't process with.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a thing. But I don't remember when somebody talked about out loud processing.
So there was a lot to unpack in the story you told. One of the things that I want to bring up and go back to is that so you have this early childhood experience of your father going through recovery, and then the whole family went
Hmm.
into this. But your experience, which I think is very, very common, is that you were sort of a bystander, and the awareness and the knowledge of the tools was not the same as
Hmm.
applying them to yourself. I think that's very, very common. But I also think that you show a tremendous amount of self-awareness when you talk about the fact that were you were aware that you were going through a relationship that was maybe not so
Hmm.
healthy. You were aware you had these things, and then when somebody invited you back into the meeting to Al-Anon, that you were like, "Yeah, let's go," and
Hmm.
apply it to yourself. I think that that's worth noting because there were a lot of choices there that you could have gone the other way.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Um, what was the question? Or was there a
I don't
question?
think there was a question. So
Okay.
there were topics.
I can talk about any part of
Oh
that,
yeah,
but
that's a very good point. There wasn't actually a question in there, but I guess the question is, if there is a question, is like, how do you think of yourself as a self-aware person? Were you aware that you were, that this was a helpful lens, but could also be a destructive lens that you were putting on yourself?
yeah, I think I've always been pretty self-aware. People have called me an old soul, and then I've also heard that old souls usually come about because of some sort of trauma or or adverse childhood experience or whatever. I'm like, well, maybe. Um, I know. So it's interesting when I think about the time where everybody entered recovery, and my dad has stayed in that program as support. My mom has found different places for support. I eventually said, all the kids in this program are going through physical abuse, and I don't have that, and I don't resonate with this. So I don't really, when I was given the option to continue, I was like, I don't really see how this is helpful for me at the time. I mean, my main takeaway, unfortunately, because the people who run the Ala Kid program were also in Al-Anon, so they
Mm.
were working through their own stuff. And the main thing I remember was that the person who was guiding us one day was like, "One drink and you too could become an alcoholic." And I was like, "Oh, I know that's really bad, so I shouldn't ever drink or do anything that could possibly be addictive because that would be terrible." So so to the I don't know if again it was how I processed that information or if it was I think maybe a little bit of both that and being pretty self-aware. But when I was in seventh grade, I went through a period that I was sick all the time, but the doctor was like, she's not actually sick. You should take her to a psychiatrist. And I could tell that the psychiatrist was just kind of waiting for me to say something dramatic enough to prescribe me something. I
Okay.
really wish they'd taken me to a therapist at the time, but it was the 90s and there was a lot of stuff that we know now that we didn't know back then. And so waiting eventually at a certain point he was like Prozac. And this is not to say anything about depression meds. I think they can be really helpful for people and so that's not like I my personal experience not to project onto what other people's needs are. For me, one, I was terrified of becoming addicted and they were
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's not physically addictive." And I was like, "But if I'm not addressing the emotions, and I'm just covering them with a med, how am I supposed to deal with them and how wouldn't it become addictive? Because clearly, if I'm not dealing with this, it's still there. And then what?" And they didn't have a good answer for that. So I just stopped going to the psychiatrist and didn't end up on meds and found a community actually through a youth group that would meet periodically throughout the year. And that helped me feel connected and then things slowly got better. But I think there were probably some underlying facets of perhaps ADHD. And I was listening to the Ologies podcast recently because my sister sent this episode to me about obsessive compulsive disorder. And I now working on getting set up to get tested for that because while it's not as prevalent for me, I had a really big issue when I was young with obsessive compulsive behavior. And so learning about that, I was like, oh, I wonder if these are facets that might have been impacting me at that time. But I didn't have words for it, didn't have name for it.
It is, you highlight on something that I think, and I am not qualified to talk on this other than as an observer and a participant in life. One of the huge challenges, I think, in diagnosing anybody with anything is that the person who has that job of diagnosing only has the information in front of them. And I think this gets compounded when you're working with someone who is like a child and who doesn't know what needs to be shared or how to advocate for themselves, or even a concept of what might be normal versus healthy and unhealthy to share. That just makes it really challenging to make the first right guess, you know.
Yeah.
Combine that with the fact that our medical system is so like, fractured, and you go to one person, they're like, oh, this is not what I do, but they don't send you to the other person necessarily. Or even worse, oh, well, this one is covered by your insurance, but the thing you actually need
Yeah.
is only covered by insurance on full moons on Thursdays every alternate year. If your name is Fred, like,
Yeah.
so, I mean, all of that I think is there. I think that the 12-step programs in any shape and form, named and otherwise, like, so like the AA programs are some of the most famous, but they can be polarizing in opinion. Some people
Yeah.
really love them and other people don't find them successful. So I don't think that's a polarizing statement. And I think that when it comes to meds, one of the things that's so
Mhm.
interesting is that really good meds don't necessarily work for all the people, right? Like, so
Mhm.
we'll move it out of the mental health perspective and talk about so blood pressure medication, right? Like, my
Mhm.
dad was taking blood pressure medication. There were 4 or 5 before they found one that he didn't get crazy side effects, but those
Mhm.
would have worked fine maybe for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so, I'm like, so that's the way,
There's no one size fits all.
that's right.
Really, there's just, I mean, that I think when it comes to your body, when it comes to your brain, your being, there's
Yeah.
not a one size fits all. There are certainly, I mean, I come from a sociology background, like there's certainly patterns amongst people that we can look at, but in terms of what's going to be healing and supportive for you, it, it's not something that can just be a blanket statement.
Yeah. So the through line here is that you were actively engaged from a
Mm.
pretty young age with group sort of peer support. If we
Yeah.
like, so
Well, and
Alex,
just
yeah,
self-awareness stuff in
self-awareness,
general.
self-help.
Like,
So you go, and so you're young, and so you're having these struggles. Music is a through line. It's a
yeah.
part of your family. It's all of these things. You're in college, which all by itself is a self development journey, right? So,
Hmm.
and this story takes place your senior year of college. So
Hmm.
you're really in a re-identification time, no matter, at that point anyway. Like,
Hmm.
although maybe you went on, did you go on and do more school after this, or did you
I
shift a
didn't.
job?
I
Okay,
didn't
so
end up doing that. Yeah.
so then you're also in that part of your life where you're like, all right, I have to grow up and like do this work thing somehow that has never happened. And so I think it's incredibly self-aware that you were like, all right, if I don't want to embody the message of this, what if I just change the soundtrack in my
Hmm.
car?
Hmm.
So, and how did that like how did that it just popped into your head?
Yeah, I mean, so I will to be clear with that, I didn't completely stop listening to Amy Mann. I still really liked the album. Like the music was great. And when I was in a mood, I would turn it on. It's one I've got several of her songs on that Get Out of a Funk
Okay.
playlist. And for me, it was really just that, like, I need to pause on this for a minute. I need to give myself a refresh. But even just the conversation, the awareness that I was embodying
Okay.
the words and what was being said, that there was a relationship to this space that I was sitting in. I think that idea of even the progression out of it, because I would sit in a album for a while, like the Who's Tommy, when I was in maybe seventh, eighth grade, that was on repeat,
Yeah.
and the see me, hear me, touch me, feel me, like that I even get chills still saying that because like I was so desperate to feel seen and connected. That belonging sense was so there was such a gap
Yeah.
in my life around that. So I think even just taking a break and going, I don't need to keep feeding myself this message, at least for a little while. But that the interesting thing with that conversation, like that I had with myself, is I turned that music off. I don't even remember what I put in next. I might have just sat in silence or just had that conversation, but it was like the next day. I'm pretty sure it was the next day. I went into my costume production class. And I think I was just dropping in. I don't even think it was class time, but it was right around there. And I ended up having a conversation with a guy who graduated 2 years before me, who was working at the theater at the time and who was coming in. Unbeknownst to everybody else, his other assistant technical director was dating the other Valerie in the class. So he
Mm.
would come in sometimes with that guy. Anyway, so I was just chatting with him and he asked me if I wanted to go to a movie. And I told him, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. And that was the beginning of me not feeling like I had to answer right away or just
Okay.
kind of going along. And every part of that relationship, I called him up and I was like, sure, let me know where and when. And showed up. He wasn't there. I was like, okay, I'm going to wait for like 5 minutes. And if he doesn't show up, because we had run in different circles. So he was like, when he said, like, look, go to a movie with us, I was like thinking that it was the circle I didn't belong in that like activated a lot of feelings for me. And I was like, oh, this is a joke. He's not here. I'm going to 5 minutes. And then he did show up. And I went to this barbecue ahead of time and it was with a whole bunch of people who like worked at the theater. And I was like, oh, this is a different crowd. Wait, he's interested in me. That wasn't like a group thing. That was like a me thing. But every piece after that of like, we went for a walk together and he invited me up to his place afterwards. And I was like, I know what happens if I go upstairs and I don't know what I want to do. So I'm going to take a rain check because I need to figure out what I what my answer would be should things progress as they are want to do when you go to a
When you
guy's
go to the room.
place. And so just those check-ins every time and pausing and saying, I want to think about this before I answer right away. Pausing was so powerful. Like, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what choice I want to make. So I'm going to pause and think about the choice that I want to make an active decision. And when we did have that moment of I said yes, I did go up, and of as things are wont to do, and I started check out because I had plenty of experiences, intimate experiences where I would just check out and not make a decision and let things happen because I wasn't going to make a decision. And he's the one who checked in with me. He was like, "We don't have to do this." And this was like one of those instant, like I think he was on top of me and he was like paused and went, "We don't, like, are you okay with this?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you asked me how I feel about this?" But that gave me that moment to go, am I sure? I noticed I was checking out. Do I want to check out or do I want to be present? No, I want to be present. Like, why would I say if I'm going to check out, I should say no and I should leave. If I want to be present, then I should actually be present. And so like every moment of that, and we've been married 20 years now.
And so when you draw a connection from beginning to do this, like this through line of like, I can make this decision about the music that I'm playing in my
Mm,
car, and then connecting it to the other things, like I'm actually in control here. I can hit pause
yeah.
and check in with myself and do that along with the very important and should be acknowledged. It's consent is for all
Hmm.
things is a power tool. Good stuff.
Hmm.
All good stuff. All right. So my next question is a revisionist question. These sometimes
Okay.
are terrible. This may not be a good question, but I have two actually.
Okay.
So looking back now, do you think that you could have actually made this shift without changing the music that you listen to? Do you think that it could have happened some other way? And this might be a terrible question. You might be like, I don't know.
Well, I think because I didn't 100% change the music, I don't know if it would have, it was really like an epiphany through the music, is the way I would describe
Okay.
it, right? It was more of a like, I was listening and I noticed something. And
Yeah.
noticing is so powerful. It was, oh, so. because it wasn't completely gone, it was more I can choose what I'm resonating with. I think that was more of what it was with the music of like I can choose what I resonate with and what serves me. And I hadn't really thought of it like that before. I always just picked music that matched my like where I was. I didn't necessarily think I could do something different. And I think that's where that playlist, that progressive playlist idea came from was like all right, well, I've tried the whole like, just don't feel like that. That's not really healthy or helpful. And so, what if I chose to draw myself out of it? Right? What if I
Yeah.
picked, I want this music right now because I'm feeling these feelings, but I can choose not to stay there. I can choose to do things that allow me more room in my experience. And I know that when I'm in that space, not to make decisions. I
And
think
I
that's the biggest piece. I know that when I'm in this space, this is my life's happening to me. And so if I make decisions in this space, they're not decisions. They're non-decisions.
And one of the things that I'm wondering, and this is a question like not pre-thought, could be terrible. It seems like there was an element of this which was sort of allowing the autoplay, the
Hmm.
checkout. So like making the
Yes.
playlist, that's like a really intentional sequence of music. But like, you mentioned that the Tommy CD was like on repeat,
Hmm.
and that you would check out in situations that you didn't want to make a decision. But it's like making that decision to turn off the music at that time and think about it. I wonder, does that sound like that's actually like sort of the nugget that was sort of the command choice, the
I
action?
think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
pulling in intentionality, going,
Yeah.
"Oh, I can choose." And I think to that point, like knowing I can choose to be in this mode, I can choose to listen to this music and be in this vibe, but I know the dynamics of it for me. I
Okay.
know that I don't want to stay here and that I don't have to stay here. And I know that I don't want to make decisions from here.
From that one thing. Now, do you use now, and I think that the fact that you make the playlist leads me to believe that this might be like a something that is you've sort of already answered. But then do you do it the other way? Do you sometimes like intentionally put on music to try and lead you into a certain mood or
Mm.
feeling state? Like it's like, all right, so I would like to feel better. Let's put on, Farrell.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I definitely pick music based off of the energy that I want. So one of the things that I've done, so in my own podcast, I ask at the end of every interview, because my podcast is named Mindset Unlimited, and so at the end I ask people, what song do you listen to when you want to evoke that unlimited feeling?
Oh,
Right.
so
So I
yeah.
ask, what does it mean to be unlimited to you? And then what song do you listen to that evokes that for you? And so I have a whole playlist. You can see playlists are definitely a theme. I have a whole
Yeah.
playlist of music that people have said evoke that for them. And it's so eclectic. Like there's such a so I wouldn't say I necessarily listen to that playlist when I'm looking to feel unlimited because it's not necessarily all the songs that I would choose for that. But I love that there's such a experience of music that is articulated in that. For me, recently with music, it's mostly like what my kids want to listen to. I
Sure.
know my husband and I often joke with the kids about like when we say, not this song again, like we
No.
want to listen to something else. We joke about how when we were in the car, we had to listen to what our parents wanted to listen to unless we had headphones. And
Yeah.
otherwise, we weren't nearly as flexible with what we were listening to. But I enjoy being exposed to different things and different ideas. So I think maybe that answered the question.
I think it did. Do they still have for kids? There used to be this thing called Kids Bop. Is it still around? They were like,
Last we listened to it, it
okay,
was, but my kids, I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. So I actually like, I mean, we went to the My Chemical Romance concert
okay.
just recently, and both of them just loved it. My older son plays guitar, and he's pretty awesome on it. Just
That's very cool.
I don't think it's just a mom's opinion. I feel like other people have said so too, but
You get to have the
I
mom's opinion though.
I'm allowed to have a mom's opinion.
Hmm.
And so I think my younger son tends towards the music that I'm like, okay, I can't because he does like the game music, like Among Us
Mm-hmm.
songs and things that people have made up about video games and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And some of that's fine, but some of it gets a little old and he wants to listen to it all the time. I get that there's a thing about at these ages like listening to the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So, but uh yeah, so I listen to a lot of a lot of their music.
They used to when some of the kids in our they were like giveaways they would give you at some restaurant they would give you Kids Bop CDs.
Mm.
My sister-in-law she got it at the restaurant. They put it in the car and she was not even out of the parking lot before she took the CD out and was like, "No, we are never listening. We're not listening to this ever again." She was like, "Give me the actual songs."
Hmm.
Or you do not need the Kid Bop mix. So, all right. So we've talked about this. You can see that there are some pretty big shifts that have gone through your life that you tie back to this one moment in your life, sort of
Hmm.
like ripples in a pond, like when you drop a rock into a pond. Is that still true today? Do you still see the things that you're doing and being intentional and tie it back to that one decision, that one conversation with yourself?
I mean, I think that it was a trajectory that has had a huge influence. I always have this thing when people do have like this one thing happened and my entire life changed forever. And I do think that each choice that we make changes things. I love, the idea, the
Oh,
multiple dimensions and right, like I'm a Marvel fan.
the butterfly
Right.
theory. Yep.
All of that. So I do think that's a thing that I enjoy. And I I would say so often it's so much more minuscule than we
Yeah.
think. Like I'm waiting for that one thing to happen. That is the biggest epiphany that I've ever had. Like and not to say that everything changed forever. Like the idea of making choices, one of the things that I've realized over time is that there are plenty of places where I didn't realize that I had choices
Sure.
or that I was making choices. And so, like, while that was much more present in this one-to-one interaction in a romantic relationship, that my focus was around how do I have healthy relationships, I didn't necessarily see that in terms of careers, in
Sure.
terms of what I chose to have in my life, whether I chose to have kids, whether I chose to buy a house, like, oh, where I chose to live. Like, they were choices, but I didn't know some of the underlying conditioning that influenced those choices. And so as I've unpacked more of those things, I'm like, oh, and that expands it, right? Then I see more things. So I think the idea of being intentional with choice was really accessed, that shift out of I can't influence what happens was that moment. And then the desire to be empowered, to the desire to be an agent of my life was really activated in that moment. And there are plenty of places where I'm like, I can look back and go, huh, if I had thought about that, if I had been like, is this really my choice or is this my social conditioning?
Yeah. I think I mean, this is just my opinion. I think that sometimes that's unavoidable. And one of the things that I've thought about sometimes is that I'm not sure it's always helpful to do that deep dive for what we could have done in the past. I mean, sometimes I think it is very helpful, don't get me wrong. But there are times where, and I've said, specific to like relationships and parenting and things, you can look back and be like, wow, I didn't realize I was making the decision at that moment or the choice that I didn't see. And sometimes that's great. And other times it's like, well, if I had noticed, and there's a point where the microscope is not helpful. We're turning it in on ourselves
Oh
and
yeah.
it's only.
I'm not actually a huge fan of going back into the past and going, what would I have done if, or woulda, coulda, shoulda kind of stuff. What I do think is helpful because our patterns
Yeah,
we carry the patterns. So, like, if we think about trauma responses, everything is in our bodies. So when we have this interaction or this experience, it's not a past thing. Time warps and we are in the experience that we had and we make decisions from that experience. So I think, there's a place of, I like to look at patterns. So we're not going, if we do look at the past, we're not looking at the past in order to go, oh, I wish I had done this. It's what motivated this?
Yeah.
What made these conditions? And it's not even just like things I didn't like, it's things that I did like, and looking at what was helpful about that, what supported me in this situation, what kept me from making this is the decision that I would have liked to have made, what environment was present for me, looking at the patterns that are playing in the present, that to know, oh, these came from, I still have these patterns playing. So it's
Yeah.
not so much past, it's more present. What's going on right now? How do and I can see it better when I can see uh, the expanse of it sometimes than when I'm just looking. I could make it like, oh, I just did that just now. Well, but did I? Or did I do it like what I did before because I'm perceiving things from this lens that is built up over my entire life up
Yeah.
until this point.
And for me, and then we'll wrap this up because I could talk to you all day. One of the things that's been interesting is as I get older and wiser, at some point people started asking me things like, "Hey, well, why did you make this
Mm,
decision?" And I can remember sometimes thinking, "I don't know why I made that decision. Why did I make that?" Like, and that put me in the spot of like, why did I make that decision? And having to think about it. And some of that comes up when you've got you create your own army and you're trying to, guide them into, their best life. And you think, why did we do it this way? Like, what is the reason that we do it this way?
mhm,
And so there are some times where I have learned the repetitive questions where you get the same question from people over and over again, like, hey, why did you do
mhm,
this? And there are a couple of them that I've learned to say, I'm like, listen, I'll tell you what I did. And I'll tell you what I think the lessons were. But I don't want to put myself in a position of judging this past decision I made because I can't go back and change it. Like I've lived with the impact of that. And so
mhm,
me reflecting for a long time on the why of that it doesn't do me any good. Like you're in a position where you get to make your own decision. Now is the time for you to think about it. But
mhm,
for my life, it's in the past. I already did it.
mhm,
I
mhm.
already jumped off the bridge. I can't undo it.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what, like I guess it's semantics and really in a lot of ways, not maybe necessarily a thing, but it was so people used to ask me all the time, like, if you had to do it again, would you
Mhm,
be a step parent? And I was like, that is not a helpful question for me to ask myself because I have done it. I can't undo it. And
mhm.
it just, like I'm like, I will tell you what I did, but I'm not going to put myself in that spot to judge my past decision
Yeah.
anymore.
I think the energy behind the question really matters.
Yeah, but people mean well,
Yeah,
you
yeah, but I
know.
mean how I
Yeah.
ask the question, right? Like
Yes.
how I process that question because I work with so many women who look at their life and go, if I not that, and there's a lot of caveating of like, I would not change having kids for the world. I love my kids. I wouldn't not do that again. Like, I wouldn't change that it's there. But if I had known what I know now, I don't know if I would have made the choice
Right, which
to
is
have kids. And I have worked with so many women, and there's a lot, it's hard to acknowledge that. There's a lot
yeah.
of shame, there's a lot of guilt around that feeling. And bringing it to voice to be able to look at and go, well,
Yes.
how does that influence where you are now? The fact
Yes.
that you made those choices, we know has this impact. And what inspired that choice? Like what
Right.
influenced you? And what could we do to shift some of those things so you feel like you have more power now, even because you wouldn't change, because you can't change, because it is
Yes,
what
you
it is.
cannot.
One of the things that I really liked is just a little coaching trick or a
Yeah.
little magic or whatever you want to call it. Is the type of question
Yeah.
that you ask. So like why has a kind of an innate judginess
It
to
is
it,
a judgment. That's true.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so asking why, that's what I mean about like the energy is like asking why often has this feeling of like, I maybe it was wrong. Maybe I
Yeah.
shouldn't have done that. Like there's a lot of energy to that. So like I find to the answers that you give,
Yeah.
asking that, well, what am I learning from this? What
Yeah.
motivated that decision? What do I want to take away from it in for my present moment so that I can keep growing and expanding? and being more of the person that I want to be in this moment with the reality that I have built for myself.
Yes. And I think it's unfair that anybody out there who's in the position where they're caregiving for parents, for siblings, for kids, it's find yourself the village that honors the fact that it's a lot of work and that none of us ever know what the future is going to bring. And like we buy the dream that we want in advance. And it's like people sell us the cute booties and the outfits and the very, very cute smiles. And there's no advertising about small children that is at 3 a.m., sick kid crying for 4 hours.
Heck, even
Um,
if there was, I think a lot of us, I think I would have been like, well, that's not going to be my kid.
I know. I
Right?
was the very, very, very best version of my adult stepmom mom self before I had children. Like I was amazing before I had to do it for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, there's no
So,
preparation because our society is not designed to support that. I read Gabor Mate's recent book, The Myth of Normal,
yep.
and it really highlighted some helpful things along those lines. But
Yeah,
yeah.
no, it's one of my takeaways from that book that I call out all the time is he's one of the first people who I heard say that right now in present time, we've transferred the concept of authority and respect to the institution and the buildings
Yeah.
as opposed to people with experiences. And that's one of the themes behind this show, that the voice of personal experience can be very complementary and helpful along with expert opinions. And my joke about that is the dentist who walks you through what the root canal is going to be like, that's going to be maybe a different story than the person next to you who just had a root canal last week. Both are
Hmm.
helpful.
Yeah, yeah,
Both are helpful.
because that person's experience might not be your experience,
Yep.
and it's useful to hear other
Yes.
people's experiences, but also like where are they coming from with anyway, it's so there's no one size fits all, right? Like
As we said,
you have to
exactly. It's
source
a
the
theme.
information.
It's a theme. All right. So, in a second, we're going to do the final questions. I want to give you a chance. You mentioned coaching. I want to give you a chance to tell people about what you do and how you want them to find you online after they watch and listen to this fabulous episode.
Yeah, well, I you can find me online on my website, which is my name, valeriefriedlander.com, and I have a podcast called Mindset Unlimited that is in its fifth season, and so you can find me by listening there. I always encourage people to listen there because then you get a sense of my personality and my process and my approach and worldview and all of those things. And I think all of that's really important when you're looking for a coach and somebody to, or anybody who's supporting you on a very personal level. I tend primarily to work with women who are in periods of transition, usually within their career or their professional life, but sometimes will come to me in a life transition and we work around bringing that, unpacking the past patterns and into the how do I want to move forward in my present and what do I want to create and who do I want to be and helping move forward with intentionality. So
Yeah,
that's
no,
that's the work that I do.
intentional life design. I love it. All right. So you have a very special offer for the audience, which is called the Energy Leadership Index Assessment, ELI.
Mhm.
And there's a giant description here. Normally, which is in the show notes, everybody can check it out. Normally, this is for sale for $375, but you've given us a code of imperfect for 60% off. And there is a link that people can use. That is in the show notes wherever you are watching and listening to the show. But the very easiest way to get these links is always to be subscribed to the Imperfect Adulting email community because then I send it straight to your email box and you just click on it. You don't have to hunt up a pen while you are on the treadmill listening to the show. So, just my little bit of advice. Valerie, are you ready for the final three questions?
I think I'm as ready as I could be.
I know I oversell this in
I know.
intensity every single time. Okay,
I
so
listen to your podcast, so I hear it. I'm like,
I
everybody
know
has
it's
that
got
same
that
reaction. I'm like,
very,
well, here we go. Let's
there
do
we
it.
go.
I
Exactly.
ride
All right.
roller coasters.
I don't think I have that on yours, but okay, let's see. All right. I truly, truly, when I came up with the concept of this, I did not realize how many questions I would be coming up with. That is definitely like a point of personal objectivity. Okay. What is one way that you enjoy working movement into your life?
Mm. So we have this really nice lagoon near us. We're near a natural nature preserve area, and there's a lagoon. Gompers Park Lagoon. It is beautiful. And so after everybody goes off to their various places, I will go for a walk in the morning around the lagoon and bird watch. And I sometimes will add in like walking around the neighborhood and just, being present to the place that I live. And so that is that. And then also dance parties, because dance parties are great. So
I
like
love it.
put on the music that I want to dance to and then dance.
So good. All right. When you, Valerie, have a question in 2025 and you're getting ready to do some research, what are some of the first tools that you will use to get started with that research?
Oh, it so depends on what I'm researching, I
Mm.
feel like a lot of times I'm really interested in people, so I will talk to people. That is
Okay.
more like that would be my go-to is curiosity about people. But recently I've been exploring some generational patterns and like the idea of a micro history around like when do women stop being this my great grandmother called my great grandmother very bohemian, who turned into this person that she knew as someone who turned on the term refined. And I have been so curious in reading, my grandmother was a poet, and reading that poem where she talks about this shift in like I guess it was the 1800s or whatever, but
Wow.
you know uh going, well, what shift? Because I see this generationally and like what happens. So looking at, I've gone down the rabbit hole of like the ancestry.com, or what the family tree stuff, kind of going, where are these roots from? Like what are we tied to? What's the relationship? So that's been another area of recent study. So people, books, and then like specifically recently the family tree
The
stuff.
family tree stuff, that is such a cool thing. All right, very good. So now we're going to ask you about connection. Um, how would you say that you like to connect with people? I can't, I write these in advance, so I didn't know you were going to talk about people in the earlier one. Connect with people today in 2025. Do you like to connect with people? So this, you mentioned something in person with like food, drink, like a party, happy hour, share a meal, an event, so on and so forth. Are you likely to call somebody, or go online or video chat or text or message? How do you like to connect today in 2025?
I think how I like to connect and how I typically do connect are two different things, unfortunately. And that has to do with just all of the things. I prefer this kind of connection, to be quite
Okay.
honest. If it can't be in person, I'd rather be like video chat, like face to face sort of dynamics. That's my preference. I do find that with close friends, a lot of times I'm sending voice messages back and forth
Okay.
because I talk more
Yep.
easily than I write. So I'll like process stuff on a voice message. So those are my two preferred.
That is okay. When people send me voice messages, I'm so funny because like first of all, like I have to be in a place where I can like listen to it. Like if I'm standing in my kitchen, I'm like, okay, what is this going to be? And then sometimes will type my response back. I don't know why. And I always do like a thing. I'm like, I don't know if this is breaking like an etiquette rule. Like if somebody sends me a voice message, is it only appropriate for like, should I supposed to record it and send it back? Like I do this whole like self-coaching thing, like where I'm like, am I following the rules of this message or am I not? I don't understand.
I mean, my friends, I have people who are, it's more easy to type things
Yeah.
out. I don't like, usually when they come in, it's on my phone, and
Yeah.
I don't like typing on my phone at all. I'll do it, but I don't like it.
Mhm.
So it's easier for me to hit a record and talk than to either type it on with my thumbs or sit at a computer and type it out. But so yeah, but I have people who are like listen to the message and like respond while they're listening, typing it out, and that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Just for me, it's the response that matters, and this is from me who also has the I don't know what I want to say, and I don't come back to it. I'm like, I am so sorry, I have not gotten back to you in ages. I
So yeah,
apologize.
but for like years when I was doing like kid carpool, right, and people would send me voice messages and
Oh
it would
yeah.
like come up on like the car like system and he's like, "Do you want it? Do you want me to play this?" And I'm like, "No, because God only knows what that's going to be and everybody in the car maybe doesn't want to hear about it."
Yes.
But anyway,
Yes.
that's it. All right, that's it. Valerie Friedlander, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest today on the Art of Imperfect Adulting.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for listening today. I hope that you enjoy the show. And before I go, I want to encourage you to become a bigger part of the conversation. Obviously, Subscribe wherever you're listening to the show. Listen to more episodes. That'd be great. Obvi again, please write a review and tell your friends about the show. That truly is a great help for getting the show in front of new people. Okay, but more fun for you yourself, head over to imperfectadulting.com and join the email community. You'll get some free stuff right away, and that way you'll begin to get the emails about the podcast. This includes the links for the special offers from the guests, and it's the only way to get that. Also, if you aren't in the mood to listen, I actually include an article directly in those emails. Whee! Now, if you love this and you crave more time with me, Amy, as a coach, a mentor, or just adultier adult, numero uno, check out The Village. If you have a story you want to share with the listeners, I'd love to hear from you. I have an open application. Just let me know you want it. And that's a wrap for today. Until next time, remember, the journey is the destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that, not me. Well, until just now, I did just say it. But what I want you to hear today is that if your adulting journey isn't going the way you expected, that may not mean that you're lost. It may just mean that you're on your way. This is Amy Stone, signing off. The Imperfect Adulting podcast is created and produced by Amy Stone and Amy Says So. Anything expressed on this show is offered as entertainment, and the views of the guests may not always represent the ideas and viewpoints of the host. That's me. Amy does not intend or hold herself out to provide professional advice or recommendations of any kind. In the end, you and you alone need to make those kinds of decisions based on your personal and individual situation, needs, circumstances, and comfort level.